Hello, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Just want to say welcome to you all. I just want to take this opportunity to greet everyone in the chat. Hello, Cinnamon Girl too. Glad to see you. Paul, my main man, always a pleasure to see you. And Marta, always a pleasure. Thank you for coming, all of you. Welcome to everyone and to this next part of the Brinks-Mat gold bullion robbery. And like I'd like to do with, as I've been doing it with all the other episodes, is I like to play a little recap just to refresh some memories. So what we'll do now is that I will play the recap of yesterday's episode so we can just get it all fresh in our minds. A recap of episode 5, West Kingsdown. The Noise residents had been subject to surveillance from C11. DC John Fordham and DC Neil Murphy moved in on the property, Hollywood Cottage, which was the Noise residence. Now, both Fordham and Murphy were dressed in wetsuits and balaclavas, and Fordham had disturbed the Rottweilers whilst he was moving through the shrubs and the undergrowth. Now, the barking noise from the Rottweilers naturally drew Kenneth Noy out of his property into his garden with a torch and a knife he had earlier to fix a car battery that was on him. Now, when Noy got close to Fordham, he assaulted Noy and a fight broke out. And subsequently, what happened is Noy ended up stabbing Fordham 10 times in self-defense. Now, both Reader and Noy's wife were in the house at the time. When the police swooped in, Reader was off early, only to be caught later by the police. Now, Noy and Reader were both tried for the murder of Fordham, and the court was held at the Old Bailey, and they were both acquitted of the murder. Now, also, I wanted to add as well, Mickey McAvoy is in Leicester prison and he's hearing news and he's getting irate with one of the robbers, Brian Perry. Now, Brian has just gone and bought a massive house in Biggin Hill, Kent, and is splashing the cash. Mickey's getting concerned that his share is being spent. Now, off the back of that, Brian Perry is now trying to eliminate Gordon Parry, because what he believes is Gordon is basically a grass, and so he sent out organised a hit to eliminate Parry, but the police intervened. So, like I say in all of these clips, all this information I am providing is in the public domain. Okay, whilst elements of the story are true, it cannot all be verified as 100% accurate. This video is for educational, entertainment and satire purposes. Please enjoy the live. Okay, I just want to quickly go to the chat before I pick up again where I left off. We've had a few more people come in. Hello, Joe Delamore. Yeah, completely understand, mate. As I say, so you can catch it on the replay. Hello there, Marta. Good to see you. Yo, Baywatcher, thank you for coming. Right, folks, I'm going to go on to Avatar now, and I will get cracking into the story. So it was that supremely confident Kenneth Noy strolled back into the dock at the Old Bailey, number 12 court in May 1986. 5 months after his acquittal for DC Fordham's murder. Alongside him in the witness box were fellow conspirators Reader, Chappell, Patch, Tommy Adams, Lawson, and an elderly fence called Matteo Constantino. They had all spent the intervening time in prison cells after being arrested during the lead up to the trial, but nothing had dampened their spirits following what Noy saw was a superb victory over his great enemies, the Cozzers, in the Fordham murder trial. The defendants and their small army of 14 defence bariters were supremely optimistic before the trial, which was expected to last 2 or 3 months. All of the defendants denied handling the bullion, as they did a second charge, which all except Lawson faced conspiracy to evade VAT. Now, as far as the first more serious offence was concerned, Noy was the principal defendant, as he had been during the earlier murder trial. The gold distribution chain had started with him. If the jury couldn't agree that he was guilty of conspiring to handle stolen gold bullion, then they certainly couldn't convict any of the others. Judge Richard Lowry QC seemed an ideal choice to preside the case. The entry in Who's Who listed fossiling, searching for gold in old disused scenes as one of his hobbies. Noy believed there was a crucial flaw in the prosecution case. There was no tangible evidence that the gold he'd been handling came originally from the Brinks-Mat Hall. But following the death of John Fordham, the police had made some very thorough inquiries into Noy's business dealings. They knew that after the Brinks-Mat robbery, Noy had deposited large amounts of money abroad, sometimes using a false name. They also had a record of all the replies he had allegedly made while being interrogated by the police, together with Brian Reeder's damning admission shortly before he was charged that the gold he was handling came from the Brinks-Mat Hall. Probably the most significant piece of evidence against Noy was some of the jottings in one of his diaries which showed the daily gold price fixes at the time of the Heathrow robbery. I mean, why would he have made those if he was not involved in handling the gold? What Noy and the others did not realise was that the young barrister was sitting on the back of the court, carefully noting down every single reference to where the gold might have ended up after the heist. He was employed by the Brinks-Mat insurers, who remained determined to recover as much of the gold as possible. Armed with the evidence, they sent a team of private investigators to study homes and offices of all the Brinks-Mat suspects. They targeted many other people, even those who had not been prosecuted by police. It didn't matter to the insurers whether they'd been charged or not. If they used some of the money raised from the gold to improve their lifestyles, then that made them legitimate targets. Files were opened on each and every person, as well as many companies linked to the Brinks-Mat case. Documents were carefully assembled. Kenneth Noy and others had made the mistake of thinking that it would be only the police that would pursue them. They didn't know where we were coming from. They thought perhaps we had some sort of moral vendetta against them, while in fact we just wanted to recover the stolen property, insurance lawyer Bob McCunn later explained. During the trial itself, Noy talked about the gold smuggling operation, but refused to name any of the individuals involved and claimed no records were ever kept of the various transactions. Noy was unable to explain why the date the Brinks-Mat raid had an asterisk placed against it in his wife's 1983 diary, with a doodle drawn alongside it. An examination of Brendan Noy's 1984 diary showed a similar asterisk every 25 to 28 days. Noy's defence counsel, John Matthey, helpfully explained to the court, "It is clear what those asterisks relate to." In the summing up to the court, Matthew admitted to the jury that Ken Noy was a wheeler dealer. He may have evaded his tax responsibility, but he may have had trouble over the years, but not for some years with the law. But at least one could say he was never been an idle layabout. As he said, "I don't do any transactions without a deal on the side. Not paying your taxes and smuggling in this day and age, you may think possibly unhappy, are looked upon by many as being in totally different bracket to the offences of theft and handling stolen property." 2.5 months after the trial began, the court rose and the jury of 8 men and 4 women retired to consider its verdict. The jurors were informed that, under the supervision of court bailiffs, they would be looked at after an £80 a night London hotel. No discussion of the case would be allowed outside the jury room. Now, the loss adjusters handling the Brinks-Mat insurance claim for lawyers were so concerned that the defendants might be acquitted that they launched a civil action against them for the following morning. In a High Court action, the judge agreed that the assets of all 7 accused should be frozen pending the outcome of the civil hearings. And in the middle of all this, rumours were spreading about the jury in the criminal trial. The stories were damaging and highly offensive, and none of them have ever been proven to be true. It wasn't until the following Wednesday the jury finally returned with their verdicts. Noy, Reeder and Chappell were found guilty both of the conspiracy to handle stolen bullion charge and the VAT charge. By the time the last defendant, Constantino's conviction for evading VAT was announced, the judge had to shout to make himself heard. Patch, Adams and Lawson were all acquitted. Tommy Adams' equally notorious brother Patsy proved that London's premier crime family, the A-Team, did have Teflon skin when he was acquitted of importing 3 tons of cannabis shortly after Tommy's court appearance. "I hope you all die of cancer," screamed Noy at the jury as the verdicts against him sank in. Noy's wife Brenda then shouted across the public gallery, "Never has such an injustice been done. There is no fucking justice in this trial." Pointing to the jury, Brian Reader exploded. "You have made one terrible mistake. You have to go and live with that for the rest of your life." Reader's 20-year-old son Paul scuffed with the police officers as he shouted, "You've been fucking fixed up." He was arrested for contempt of court and later bound over for the sum of £100 to keep the peace for 12 months. Defence counsel Matthew was infuriated by Noy's outburst. And Ken Noy, his comments from the dock would not help when it came to sentencing. Down in the cells beneath the Old Bailey, customs officers immediately slapped a 1 million writ on Noy for the VAT that said he'd evaded. A 6-page High Court writ was also served on him from the Inland Revenue, claiming nearly 1 million in back tax. The following day, in a bid to make amends, Noy, casually dressed in a pale blue sweater and an open-neck shirt, apologised to the judge before sentencing was announced. His outburst, he said, had made him in the heat of the moment. Then he stood resignedly at Judge Lowry, jailed him for 13 years for plotting to handle the gold and fined him £250,000. Noyd was also fined a similar amount for evading VAT, plus an extra year's imprisonment, and ordered to pay £200,000 towards the cost of the court case, which was estimated to be £2 million. Noyd then received another 2 years imprisonment for failing to pay the 2 fines. He couldn't pay, his assets had been frozen. Judge Lowry said the fines could be considered paltry compared with the sums of money involved in the handling of the gold. Chappell was jailed for a total of 10 years for both offences, fined £200,000 and ordered to pay £75,000 towards the cost of the prosecution. While Reader, described by Judge Lowry and Noy's vigorous right-hand man, was jailed for a total of 9 years. Constantino was given a year, suspended for 2 years on the VAT fraud. A day later, it was announced that Kenneth and Brendan Noy, plus 2 others, would face trial over the Messian china found in one of their secret compartments at Hollywood Cottage and one of the houses in Heather Avenue, West Kingsdown. As Noy's assets were frozen, he applied for what was granted legal aid. Later, Noy also received a 4-year concurrent sentence for receiving the stolen property. No evidence was offered in the case against Brenda Noy, and she was discharged. A charge of conspiracy to handle stolen gold bullion that had been hanging over her was also dropped. One of the defendants pleaded guilty to assisting in the retention of the stolen property and was fined £500 in order to pay £150 in costs. Noy's sister, Hilary Wilder, and her husband Richard, a legal executive, both of whom also lived in Heather Avenue, West Kingsdown, faced trial for receiving £50,000 from the proceeds of the Brinks-Mat gold and had been discovered by their neighbour in a package by a garden fence. Both were later cleared, although the money was eventually reclaimed by the Brinks-Mat insurers. In London's underworld, reaction to the sentencing varied enormously. Craig's associate, Freddie Foreman, said, "As far as the police was concerned, this was the first opportunity they had to convict Noy, so they made sure he got the maximum sentence. They could have given him a day or more. Many criminal faces were infuriated that the death of Fordham had undoubtedly sparked an even more energetic probe into the dealings of every single person who was even vaguely linked with the Brinks-Mat gold bullion robbery. So there was no reason for Noy to kill that copper. He could have just let the dogs sort him out. It was such a stupid thing to do. It caused a lot of problems that we could have done without," commented one of the Brinks-Mat team members. Unsurprisingly, I'm just going to stop there. Tinu, thank you, but good to see you. Unsurprisingly, undercover police officer John Charles, first on the scene following Fordham's death, was shocked by the outcome of both the Noy trials. We all thought the trial was just an open and shut case and that Noy was guilty of John's murder. We were all devastated when he was acquitted. The second trial seemed less important because Noy had been acquitted of the murder. That was totally, in my view, a miscarriage of justice. DC Fordham's partner, Neil Murphy, was convinced that Kenneth Noy was far from innocent in the John Fordham case. He was playing the very sincere, quiet man, who just happened to go out into his garden, saw someone dressed like who jumped on him. So he says, okay, I don't know what made me do it, but I picked up this knife and okay, I stabbed him 10 times. And okay, I don't know what made me do it, but I thought he was attacking me. I won't accept that. What happened ever. Both cops and robbers were all made aware that ever since the heist, enormous amounts of Brinks-Mat money had been deposited in banks across the world, and that no matter what was going on in court, the infrastructure continued to exist. Just after the end of the second Noy trial, a married couple from Britain was stopped by German border guards at the Swiss frontier, and £500,000 in new £50 notes was found in their car. It was part of a consignment of $710,000, and they apparently planned to deposit it in the bank in Switzerland. Multiple companies now exist in Panama, the Cayman Islands, Spain, and London that had all been set up to purchase the property with Brinks-Mat's proceeds. Money was often transferred from bank to bank until it arrived back in London to fund new business enterprises. By the end of 1986, police and insurance investigators had concluded that between £6 and £7 million continued to float around in mirrored bank accounts and a trust fund in Liechtenstein. That figure was growing constantly thanks to more and more lucrative property deals in the markets, such as London booming Docklands area and the Costa del Sol. However, not all deals were profitable. Ironically, some of the Brinks-Mat gang were taken for a ride by other criminals. 4 of the gang had invested $100,000 in some oil fields in Texas. It wasn't until the Brinks-Mat investigators visited the area they found out that the oil wells had been dry for more than 10 years. The villains had been well and truly fleeced. In other deals financed by the Brinks-Mat gold bullion, areas of prime land were purchased in Sussex for more than £250,000, but the land had restricted planning permission attached to it, and no houses could be built on it. It was worthless. There was also $1 million paid out for some land in Florida, which was even more useless because it was a swamp. Now, some relationships with the criminals in the States proved more positive. Elsewhere in Florida, tenacious detectives investigating the robbery and its aftermath came across some evidence linking some of the gang with the mob. One man they'd been watching for months was seen in London in the company of a 27-year-old criminal called Scott Iceman Arico. Arico was the chief enforcer for the Miami-based drug gang known as the Thompson Organization. He turned out to be a hitman, and the police in the US had him linked to murders of at least 3 men. How you doing, Co-Train? Good to see you. The connection of Arico convinced detectives that they were now dealing with an international organised crime. Scotland Yard officers were assigned to visit Florida many times over the following few years to try and trace the gold and establish the strength of those UK criminal links to the mafia. At the time of this meeting in London, Scott Arico was on the run after being arrested for murder, kidnapping and drug smuggling. 2 years later, detectives monitoring Arico's Brinks-Mat contact identified him during a full surveillance operation when he visited London again. Determined not to allow Arico out the country, police stopped him at Heathrow as he was about to board a plane to Spain. When he was searched, 3 switchblade knives were found in his jacket pocket. In his suitcase was £15,000 and 2 false passports. Detectives also found 1.3 million in an Isle of Man bank account under the name of Rico's aliases. Rico tried to fight his extradition back to the US because he knew he could face the death penalty there. He was eventually extradited amid rumours that he had offered 1 million in cash to anyone who could spring him before he arrived back in his home country. Over on Spain's Costa Blanca, well away from the Costa del Sol, a friendly Brit called John Fleming was living the high life with drugs and women. Thanks to a lot of money that seemed to have mysteriously fallen into his hands not long after the Brinks-Mat robbery, some even wondered if he had been one of the actual blaggers. Naturally, Fleming denied it to all sundry, but detectives decided to put him under surveillance in Spain. Fleming was arrested by Spanish police and told he would be extradited back to the UK on charges of handling some of the Brinks-Mat proceeds. But after being given bail, Fleming flew to Costa Rica with no mention of ever returning to Europe. Fleming was eventually thrown out of Costa Rica and extradited to Miami. On the plane, he sat next to Scotland Yard detective, who later reported Fleming as saying, "The world and his fucking wife knows that I've had something to do with it, but you don't have fucking nothing. If you want, you will have to drag me back in fucking chains." It would take another 8 months before Fleming was finally sent back to Britain. Now, in the summer of 1986, a memorial stone was unveiled to John Fordham in West Kingsdown. Lord Denning, former Master of Rolls, paid tribute to Fordham and said he'd made the ultimate sacrifice in the line of duty. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher sent a wreath with the message in honour of John Fordham for his devotion and service. Shortly after the imprisonment of Noy and his Brinks-Mat associates, a serving detective and an ex-cop with links to the southeast London Underworld both died in suspicious circumstances. Detective Constable Alan Taffy Holmes was a member of the Serious Crime Squad and had been one of the investigators probing the affairs of Kenneth Noy. But in July 1987, Holmes shot himself dead in the garden of his Croydon home. He had apparently cracked after being questioned for hours by officers from Scotland Yard's Complaints Investigation Bureau about his association with Noy and another serving officer, Commander Ray Adams. Then, in the autumn of 1987, ex-policeman Daniel Morgan was found with an axe embedded in his skull in a South London car park. Detectives involved in the inquiry initially believed Morgan had been killed because he was about to expose police corruption. But it was also known that he had encountered Kenneth Noy and a number of other members of the Brinks-Mat team. This was hardly surprising. He was from the same manner as the robbers and had grown up at the time when the police and villains often worked together on strangely intimate terms. 2 other former detectives were later acquitted of all illicit activities in connection to Morgan's murder. They were known to Noy's criminal associate Kevin Cressy, who later helped bring another crooked policeman to justice. In fact, Noy was at the centre of many of the rumours about police corruption that were flying about at the time. One detective visited him at Albany Prison on the Isle of Wight and tried to persuade him to help with their investigators into allegedly corrupt senior officer at Scotland Yard. With a £500,000 house on the outskirts of London and a villa abroad, the detective under suspicion was allegedly well known to Noy. He'd also come under the press spotlight for his wealth, and within 2 months of his latest appointment, he'd been subject to a full-scale inquiry by the Yard's Complaints Investigation Bureau. The investigation, under the supervision of the Independent Police Complaints Authority, was prompted when a detective constable arrested a drug dealer in southeast London who made allegations against various officers. The investigation centred on the senior officer's relationship with his informants, or one of whom was allegedly Noy. Ken Noy refused to help the internal investigation, although he used the visit by the Scotland Yard detectives as an excuse to complain about the conditions at Albany Prison. Noyd was a shrewd operator, and there was no way he'd help the opposition unless there was something in it for him. On the streets of southeast London and in the police stations across the capital in Kent, many were watching with nervous interest as murder, double dealing, and betrayal began to engulf many of those associated with the Brinks-Mat robbery. In reality, the curse represented the intestine struggle over who owed what, but the stakes were so high that death and destruction seemed to walk hand in hand. Meanwhile, tenacious Brinks-Mat investigator Tony Lundy was delving even deeper into the myriad financial deals connected to the robbery. He even came across evidence that the gold had indirectly helped finance a group of Boston criminals with close connections to the IRA. Brinks-Mat reached far and wide. It overlapped the borders and criminal classes, and it pulled into a web of all sorts of villains, including terrorists and American mafioso members. Lundy explained many years later the involvement of the IRA was a classic example of the way the Brinks-Mat reached across borders. Another Irish connection came in the form of a shadowy villain called George the Penguin Mitchell, who was also a direct contact with the Brinks-Mat gang. The 51-year-old Dublin-born armed robber turned cannabis and ecstasy dealer Mitchell, who was reportedly worth upwards of 10 million, was on the run from the Garda, the British police in the IRA at the time. They were all keen to speak to him if he returned to Amsterdam, where he ran his hash business. Okay. So in the late spring of 1987, Kenneth Noy's associate, John Palmer, was cleared of handling the stolen gold in the Brinks-Mat robbery. Palmer had spent 8 months in custody awaiting trial. In a dramatic sequence of events leading to his arrest, he had abandoned his holiday home on the island of Tenerife and tried to enter Brazil before flying back to London to turn himself into the police. Following his acquittal, Palmer flew straight back to Tenerife, where his booming timeshare business was earning him an excess of $3 million a year. Just before Palmer's trial, legendary face John Fleming was finally extradited back to Britain from Florida, but Fleming eventually ended up spending just 2 minutes in the dock after a magistrate threw out the charges of handling cash allegedly from the gold bullion robbery. Hello there, Janie. Fleming, 48, smiled broadly after the case against him collapsed. Even Fleming's solicitor, the ever-present Henry Milner, was surprised by the decision. He said afterwards, "It was a very slim case, but we didn't really expect the magistrate to have the guts to throw it out at the stage after all the publicity that there had been about Fleming." Outside the court, Fleming was asked by a journalist how he came to such immense wealth. He told reporters, "Where the money came from is a private matter. They have put enormous pressure on me to reveal the source, but I have not told them and will not tell you now." In an interview with his author in 1995, John Fleming revealed that he played a big role in the Brinks-Mat robbery, but he refused to be more specific. It was a dream job. Hello, Nick. Thanks for coming. Lots of people made at least £1 million each out of blagging, so it deserves to be in the history books. Fleming revealed that his life had been threatened on at least 3 occasions because of his links to the robbery. He also claimed that one of those who he feared the most was a serving police officer. "That bastard knows that I know where the bodies are buried. He's still after me to this day. I have to watch my back wherever I go." The hunt for the gold continued. In the back street in Rotherhithe on a quiet, cold November morning, detectives from the Brinks-Mat task force spotted a man long connected by police to the gold bullion. The man had actually been missing from his £1 million Kent home for more than a year. Police pulled the man's car over, and one of the officers tried to grab the keys in the ignition through the open driver's window. But the officer wasn't fast enough, and instead the car, with the man driving and his son sitting alongside him, shot off while the officer lay on the bonnet before being thrown off into the gutter. Eventually, after a chase, the fugitive's son was arrested, but no trace was ever found of the wanted man. So in another twist of the tale, mad Mickey McAvoy married his second wife, Kathy, inside Leicester's Gartree prison. His first marriage to Jacqueline had broken up when she discovered his affair with Kathy following the Brinks-Mat robbery. One of his old South East London associates explained, Mickey was always very realistic about his sentence. He knew it was going to be a long haul, but he kept close tabs on what was happening outside. But what really kept him going was that the knowledge that he'd get out one day and there'd be literally a pot of gold waiting for him. Marrying Kathy was his way of telling everyone on the outside he was preparing for life in every sense of the word. But both McAvoy and Robinson were increasingly irritated by reports from the outside of other gangsters reaping vast financial benefits from what they perceived to be their Brinks-Mat gold. The involvement of the Adams family was particularly galling to them because they had apparently played no direct part in the robbery, yet appeared to be handling so much of the gold since Noy's departure from the scene. And they were across the river, explained McAvoy's old associate. That was really getting to Mickey. He considered himself the boss of the whole job, and there were the Adamses. They were all living it up, all thanks to him. Head of the A-team, Terry Adams lived in a luxury nice pad in Mill Hill, equipped with a £12,000 security system, including spike-top electric gates and video intercoms. Terry paid $222,000 to renovate the 5-bedroom, 4-bathroom house. His sitting rooms were decorated with a gold disc that is rumoured to have been given to him by a pop star, as well as a signed Arsenal shirt. To top it all, he even had a portrait of Al Pacino in The Godfather above his mantelpiece. Terry's display of wealth didn't stop at his house. His lavish spending took in a villa and a yacht in Cyprus, as well as paying for his daughter to be educated at the Sylvia Young Theatre School in London's Marylebone, and buying her a £45,000 Mercedes sports car as a birthday present. Terry's mansion was regularly used for business meetings by the family. The A-team was so brazen about their activities that they were openly knocking people off who got in their way. It was reckoned by some that at least 2 murders had been commissioned from behind the high walls of Terry's flashy pad. Ironically, despite all the levels of security, when it was bugged by the Metropolitan Police and MI5, the house played a major role in bringing about his downfall. Yeah, as I say, this is the words of the book, which I will be shouting out at the end. So this information is all in the public domain. McAvoy knew only too well that Terry Adams and his brothers, Tommy and Patrick, were involved in drug trafficking, extortion, hijackings and security fraud, making them a prime target for the causes. A Daily Mail article about Terry Adams emphasised his larger-than-life characteristics. He was noted for his flamboyant taste in clothes, for his cleverness, and above all, for his explosive temper and his delight in cruelty. He liked to wear dark velvet suits as well as bespoke rough shirts, like those worn by Errol Flynn, his childhood hero. One observer said he looked like a cross between Liberace and Peter Stringfellow. But Adams was anything but a soft touch. The article went on to describe a scene that took place at his nightclub in Beluga in North Finchley, not far from his home. That was remarkable in its violence. In the words of the witness to the events, after one of the henchmen spoke out of turn, Terry put down his knife and fork slowly. Then he whacked the guy full in the face. We heard his nose crack. There was blood all over him. Then Terry picked up his knife and fork and carried on eating. We all did the same. So did the guy with the smashed nose. Now, bullets flew when one rival crime family, the Rileys, tried to take things over. Their threat to the Adams' power didn't last long. Later, one of the A-team's henchmen, Gilbert Winter, was tried for the murder of former high jump champion. It was alleged at the court that he'd not only turned to drug dealing, but he also thought by Terry Adams to be trying to cheat Adams out of the money that the crime boss thought was rightfully his. The chief prosecution witness at the henchman's trial would not testify, and though Winter was able to walk free, his liberty was short-lived and he was soon to disappear into a concrete tomb, what eventually became the Millennium Dome. Another man feared to have been murdered by the family was a drug dealer known as Manchester John, who borrowed £100,000 and could not repay it on time. He was beaten up and made to sign over the deeds to his flat. When its value was found to be less than the debt, Patsy, together with Winter, is believed to have killed and buried him. As with the previous murder case involving Winter, those allegations were all made in open court. On another occasion, back in London, police raided Patsy Adams' house in the North London suburbs and found a gun with a complete set of bulletproof body armour. He wriggled out of that one by claiming it belonged to his wife. One of the brothers was allegedly to have been involved in a legendary incident while out in his villa near Marbella on the Costa del Sol. Rumour has it he cut off the ear of the son of the famous British gangster during a fight in a restaurant over some missing drug money. So fearsome was the Adams' reputation by the late 1980s that they began franchising their name out to other criminals who wanted to profit from the power it lent them. When detectives bugged Terry Adams' conversations, they revealed him reveling in memories of old beatings and even looking to arrange fresh assaults. "When I hit someone with something, I do them damage," he told a friend in one recording. "And I went to the geezer, I went crack. On my baby's life, Dan, his kneecap came right out. All white, Dan, all bone." And even more sinisterly, at one point in the recordings, Terry Adams was captured saying of a woman who'd crossed him, "She's got to be done. She's got to have acid flung in her face." Hello, crew. All good to see you. At one time, Tommy Adams ran a jewellery shop in Hatton Garden that the family used as a base. Saul Nahome, one of the Garden jewellery dealers, was recruited to become a highly trusted financial advisor to the family. Nahome was shot dead by a motorcyclist in North London Street, and his death is believed to have been linked to the distribution and laundering of the Brinks-Mat gold. In 1989, Terry Goodham, a club accountant, and his girlfriend were killed and dumped in Epping Forest in Essex. Mr. Goodham allegedly crossed the A-team over money, and like so many others before him, he paid for it with his life. There were talk afterwards about some of the Brinks-Mat cash had gone missing. With lots of Brinks-Mat cash, Patsy Adams had steered the A-team through the drugs explosion of the mid to late 80s. Throughout this period, the A-team were collecting friendly, greedy coppers like kids collecting dinky toys. As their power base grew, the brothers realised they could use drugs as currency to bring pressure and influence to bear judges and politicians. Meanwhile, their ownership of clubs had spread even further through the lucrative West End as far west as Fulham, on the other side of London from their home manor. One club owner in the West London told his author, "The Adamses sent a couple of their fellas down to see me because they knew I was up to my eyes in debt and they wanted the club. I didn't argue with them. They chucked me a few grand and I was out the door in minutes. I didn't want no aggro." But not even Terry Adams could have foreseen the ripple effects of the Brinks-Mat robbery. He'd been happy to handle the gold and start turning it into cash on behalf of a few friendly faces across the river. His own empire was booming, and he owned businesses and clubs right across London by this time, so it was only natural to start dealing with people from South East London. But what Terry Adams didn't realise was that in doing so, he was putting his own security and that of his beloved family directly under the police microscope. It effectively alerted detectives to a wide range of other illegal activities involving the A-team. As so many of the Brinks-Mat spin-offs, it would eventually lead to detectives to solve more crimes than they could ever imagine. Meanwhile, John Littlelegs Lloyd continued to enjoy the high life on his toes. Even though Brinks-Mat detectives had little doubt he was one of the original robbers, shortly after his friend Kenneth Noy had been nicked for the killing of John Fordham, Littlelegs sensibly made sure that word got out that he was still a long way from home. The police presumed he'd gone to America. In fact, Littlelegs was still continually popping back and forth to his old East London and Kent haunts. Completely unbothered by the worldwide manhunt in his name, at one stage Lloyd owned a car hire business in Kent. He was a regular visitor to the infamous Peacock Gym in Canning Town, as well as often dropping into his beloved Lovett pub in the East End for a swift pint. He even boasted to one associate that he preferred flying back to London on British Airways because they've got a better safety record than other airlines. It was a while he was on the run in the US. Littlelegs had famously had his shorts specially tailored so that they flattered his short, stubby legs. He also splashed out a few $1,000s on some surgery to correct his disfigured toes. A Miami court ordered Lloyd to pay in his absence $400 million to the Brinks-Mat insurers, but he never coughed up a penny. Littlelegs later describes the court's decision as a fucking joke. Back in London, a warrant along with the £10,000 reward still existed for Lloyd's arrest in connection with the Brinks-Mat. Littlelegs knew he was one of the lucky ones because McAvoy and Robinson and many of the other associates were now under lock and key. He also understood perfectly well that they were going to get more and more angry as they sat festering and wondering what has happened to their share of the gold. Now, make no mistake about it, none of the Brinks-Mat team wanted to be in jail. Prison was their way to take away their liberty, to lock them up and keep them from their beloved families and away from society. But they all knew they had to behave because the first man out the gate was the cleverest man. They left the troublemaking to the other, lesser mortals. All around them in prison were drug addicts, social misfits. McAvoy, Robinson, and all the others were professional criminals who saw it as part of their job to withstand life behind bars and bide their time. They watched as inmates injected themselves with filthy needles. They heard the gossip about who were the girl boys and who just give blowjobs, but none of them mattered to those hard-nosed characters because they all had businesses to run. They considered themselves above the riffraff and let everyone know it. How you doing, MRE? Good to see you, man. Thank you. Thank you for coming. As one former South East London detective pointed out, like other parts of the life, there's a pecking order in prisons, and more successful the criminal is, the higher up the pecking order he will be. He'll have an easier life because he'll have gophers running around doing his chores for him. Certainly, prison life was never that hard for the Brinks-Mat team. Their reputation as hard men went before them, and many of their fellow inmates were convinced that Kenneth Noy, for example, had been fitted up over the Brinks-Mat handling charges because DC John Fordham had been killed in his garden. As one prisoner officer at Albany Prison on the Isle of Wight explained, from the day that the Brinks-Mat boys arrived, from the day they left, no one laid a finger on them or even said a bad word to their faces. Those guys were revered, almost hero worshipped for the crime they had committed. The Brinks-Mat prisoners were consulted by inmates and staff alike. Numerous internal prison matters and the house rules, such as phone calls and such privileges, but there were some crews who would occasionally, and rather stupidly, try and pull rank on them. They objected to their power and influence inside prison. Before the arrival of all those jailed in connection with the Brinks-Mat robbery, vast dossiers on each of them were forwarded to the relevant prison governors, revealing every known habit. All were a Category A prisoners, which meant they were considered dangerous and likely to try and escape. They had to be accompanied at all times by a prison officer. Even at night, the attention was unyielding. Guards were ordered to make sure the Brinks-Mat members were checked on every 15 minutes. The Brinks-Mat inmates themselves knew they had to put two fingers up to the lawful society by stealing so much gold, then refusing to hand it over after their arrests. But all of them were determined just to get on and serve their time with a minimal fuss. Inside prison, McAvoy and Robinson, crawling painfully slowly towards freedom after their extremely lengthy sentences, continued to bide their time in that the knowledge that they would finally get released and they'll be able to lay their claim on the pot of gold, which would have set them and their families up for the rest of their lives. McAvoy and Robinson made a point of remembering all the names of the useful screws, some of whom made it clear that in exchange for a backhander, that ensured that the two got pretty much whatever they wanted. Money spoke louder than words, even in prison. But McAvoy, Robinson, and the others who'd been jailed knew if they blatantly bribed the prison officers, it would cause no end of problems after there were numerous closed-circuit TV cameras to record the prisoners' movements. They were all very carefully picked, their moments. Certain detectives have tried to imply that some of the BM boys offered Scotland Yard information on their fellow Brinks-Mat criminals in exchange for a reduced sentence. But the Brinks-Mat inmates knew perfectly well that this was nothing more than a clumsy attempt by the police to split the robbers into warring factions. They all insist to this day that they never grasped each other up. However, Mickey McAvoy was known as mad for a reason, much more than Robinson. He had a habit of allowing things to eat away at him. He even wrote on some of the Brinks-Mat mates still on the outside, letting it be clearly known that he was thinking about them. In one bitter letter, McAvoy wrote to the acquitted robber Tony White from his cell, "I won't have anyone else keeping my share for their own needs. He will sign his own death warrant to go through with it. If he believes we are away too long to worry about it, well, it will be done for me. I have no intention of being fucked for my money." So in April 1990, the tentacles of the Brinks-Mat reached once more across Europe into the Costa del Crime. Two of the gold handlers, who had never been caught by the police, had a score to settle over some missing cash from a massive cocaine deal. They in turn were under enormous pressure because a bunch of the Brinks-Mat gang members had been allowed their cash to be used as investment in drugs. As one of their associates later explained, and when that war went pear-shaped, there was hell to pay. The finger of suspicion was pointing right at one of South London's most legendary faces, former great train robber Charlie Wilson. He'd been living in Spain for a few years, running the highly lucrative drugs importation gang with close connections to the Colombian cartels, including the most famous drug baron in the world, Carlos Escobar, and the so-called professor, the cocaine kingpin of Amsterdam, who was the filter for virtually all drugs coming in and out of Europe. Unsurprisingly, the Brinks-Mat investment in one of Wilson's shipments had been made on the basis that he was a professional who would never fuck them over. Unfortunately, somewhere along the line, the message was not passed on to whoever it really should have concerned. The shipment, and thus 3 million of the Brinks-Mat investors' money, went missing. Many believe that Charlie Wilson knew his time was up unless he'd either found the missing shipment or paid back all the cash. He did neither, and in April 1990, a young British hood knocked on his front door of Wilson's Hasadena just north of Marbella. Moments later, the man pulled out a gun and shot both Wilson and his pet husky dog before coolly riding off down the hill on a yellow bicycle. Wilson, 58, was found by his wife Patricia, 55, choking to death outside by the swimming pool, the body of his pet dog at his side. He died in the ambulance on the way to Marbella Hospital. Now, the £500,000 villa with its mock castle turrets was cheekily named Checkers and had clearly been built with security in mind. All the windows were permanently barred and a 6-foot stone wall surrounded the property. Charlie Wilson had been sentenced to 30 years imprisonment for the armed robbery and conspiracy to rob $2.5 million from the train robbery in 1963. Like all the other train robbers, the former South London bookmaker never revealed his true role in the planning of the raid, but the underworld legend had dubbed him the Treasurer. Fellow train robber Ronnie Biggs, still on the run after escaping from prison in 1965, heard about Wilson from his hideaway in Rio de Janeiro. Biggs, 60, told reporters, Charlie was full of fun and had a wild sense of humour. He was very easy to get along with. This is a sad, tragic loss. It was a murder that shocked the underworld. Even Charlie Wilson's old enemy, the police, were appalled by an act of such cold-blooded violence on a revered villain. But what no one realised at the time was the curse of the Brinks-Mat gold had once again claimed another victim. It later emerged that Wilson had been murdered in Spain by a hit squad, believed to include one of South East London's most feared young gangsters, Danny Roth, who had also connections to a number of members of the Brinks-Mat gang. Roth was allegedly one of the gangsters owed money by Wilson. Both men had met and socialised with most of the Brinks-Mat gang down the years. Another villain with the Brinks-Mat links was Nick Whiting, an old school friend, close associate of Kenneth Noy. Whiting had been questioned by police over allegations that he was involved in laundering some of the proceeds of the robbery. The word went out that Whiting had opened up to his interrogators. A former car saloon racing champion, at 43 years old, Whiting lived in a palatial splendour in Heathrow in Kent and had built up a fortune of more than £1 million, apparently from a garage business near Rotham. In June 1990, just a few weeks after Charlie Wilson's cold-blooded murder in Spain, Whiting was abducted from his garage by an armed gang who stole 5 top-of-the-range cars. The cars were all quickly recovered from nearby locations, but there was no sign of Whiting. Then a few days later, surveyors carrying out a preliminary investigation for a new theme park at Rainham Marshes in Essex stumbled across Whiting's body, hidden in the undergrowth. The father of 3 had been stabbed 9 times and then shot twice with a 9mm pistol, a so-called hitman special. The 2 men eventually charged with his killing were later acquitted. Now, a matter of weeks later after Nick Whiting's murder, 27-year-old Stephen Dallaghan, brother-in-law of acquitted Brinks-Mat defendant Tony Wright, was gunned down in the Old Kent Road. And in the heart of South East London, Dallaghan survived but refused to talk to the police about his criminal associates or any of the circumstances behind the shooting. Detectives investigating knew only too well that yet again all the roads led to the Brinks-Mat. Being involved with the robbery was extremely dangerous, and it seemed to that other villains were sending out a clear message to their associates. So back in prison, Brinks-Mat Insurance investigated visited the incarcerated prisoners connected to the robbery on at least half a dozen occasions. However, many of the gang members were worried about their conversations were being monitored, and in the end insisted that the investigators had to deal directly with relatives or legal representatives. Now, the pressure was being piled on, though, to those associated with the Brinks-Mat robbery, because investigators feared the gold would soon completely disappear. They had already had proof that the millions of Brinks-Mat pounds had been spent on huge shipments of drugs from Morocco and South America. In Albany prison on the Isle of Wight, Kenneth Noy had other priorities as he ticked off his days of his incarceration. He wanted to be transferred out of jail's tense, top security atmosphere to somewhere nearer to home. Noy had numerous requests to the prison authorities and eventually ended up at the relatively relaxed Swaleside prison on the Isle of Sheppey, in Kent. Noy received a hero's welcome in Swaleside, where he encountered numerous familiar faces from the old Kent Road pubs and his clubs he frequented throughout his adult life. Within weeks of arriving at Swaleside, fitness fanatic Noy was given the best job inside the jail, gym orderly. This gave him access to the phone for incoming and outgoing calls. Soon he was running his criminal empire from the end of the phone. Younger, extremely fit inmates, many of whom Noy met through his new job, looked to Noy for advice and guidance. They respected him, and he rewarded their loyalty in prison with promises to invest their criminal activities once they got out. When one prison officer celebrated his birthday, Noy bought him a £600 watch bracelet. Noy and the officer even declared the gift to the governor. There was nothing the authorities could do about this because it was all done out in the open, explained another officer. Noy had a vast supply of phone cards so that he could use the main prison phone whenever he required. Although he preferred the privacy of the outside line at the gym, he even got his favourite cigars brought in for him by friendly screws. Besides his own TV cell, in his cell, Noy also kept a desktop computer, a stereo, and Brenda bought her husband a brand new duvet for his bed. In addition, Noy got his wife to bring in various items of sports equipment, including boxing gloves, weightlifting belts, 3 tracksuits, badminton rackets, and shuttlecocks. He donated all to the prison gym on one condition: he had first refusal to use any of it himself. And proving his undoubted influence and power inside Swaleside, Noy even paid out of his own pocket for a fun fair to be set up in the grounds one Saturday for inmates and their families during a special open day. Noy insisted on paying for every single ride, so none of the prisoners or the staff families had to spend a penny of their own money. The whole event cost him many thousands of pounds. A lot of us were surprised that Noy was allowed to pay for it all, but there was nothing in the rules against it, one prison staff member later explained. While he was in jail, Kenneth Noy sold Hollywood Cottage for more than £1 million and encouraged wife Brenda to purchase a £300,000 detached house in nearby Sevenoaks. It wasn't nearly as isolated as their previous home, and Noy had made a fat profit of more than £500,000 through the sale. Even from inside the prison, the Brinks-Mat team knew how to make a tidy sum of money off their various investments. Naturally, Kenneth Noy told anyone who would listen in prison that he was only defending himself when he killed John Fordham. He jumped on me first, I swear it, Noy insisted. I had no choice. Inside Swale Prison, Noy eventually joined forces with Pat Tate, one of the jail's most feared inmates. Tate was already well known to the criminals after staging a daring escape from a magistrate's court in December 1988. The heavily tattooed 18-stone Tate had been charged with the armed robbery after a knife gang held up a Happy Eater restaurant in London in Essex and stole £800. Outside the court, he leapt on a 1,000cc motorbike by a pallet and escaped. 2 policemen and a WPC who tried stopping him fleeing were injured in the process. Tate became Kenneth Noy's personal bodybuilder and minder. Amongst the bench presses and dumbbells, Tate convinced Noy that there was a fortune to be made out of the new designer drug called ecstasy. As Brinks-Mat investigation chief Brian Boyce later pointed out, as the drug explosion came about, I think everyone turned to drugs. It was drugs that became the highway and conduit for all criminal activities. Out on the mean streets of southeast London, many blaggers were fast concluding that the lucrative days of armed robberies were numbered. Security vans were monitored with radar by the police, and it was virtually impossible to rob a bank in broad daylight. As a result, drugs were emerging as the main criminal currency that could be turned into huge fortunes by the London's underworld. Noy's Southeast London family associate and turned drug dealer, Gordon McFall, explained, "It was getting harder work going, robbing. Villains stopped wanting to go robbing. They became more interested in drugs. Like many of these villains had hit their 40s and 50s, and drugs provided the perfect retirement pension. It was a lot safer than going across the pavement. Puff and coke were the favourites. You'd bung a few people at customs here and there, and you'd get the stuff through the ports easy. Drugs were wiping out the armed robbery trade. It was as simple as that." Hello there, Suzanne. Thank you for coming. Drugs were undoubtedly easy money compared to robbing, and there was usually even a middleman to take a fall in the law, caught up with anyone. Before meeting Pat Tate, Noy had been reluctant to get involved in the drug trade because it was unknown territory to him. But he knew that other Brinks-Mat gang members were already heavily involved. So if they wanted to replace all those millions, they were starting to be frozen out by the Brinks-Mat agents, then drugs really were the only answer. Okay, right, folks. I'm going to camera on. I'm going to drop it there. I'm just going to leave that like I've been doing here every day. Is just bits at a time, so you could go back if you want to read on it, and then I could do a recap at the beginning again. I just want to see who's still in the chat because I just want to make sure that everyone's got. Okay, just want to make sure we've just got people wrenched up. Okay, just bear with me 2 seconds. I don't know if save. I don't know. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so that's got if Nick and MRE is still there. So I just want to take this time as well just to thank you all for coming. Is there any questions at all? Crewmel? Thank you, Paul. I'll try. That's good. I want to try and get my words clear, but also I'm conscious of time because I'm going through the book, and I want to try and just make sure I get the literature. That's all right, Suzanne. The beauty of this is it's not really like a chat, so I wouldn't expect everyone to be there for long periods of time. So it's okay. So you can always go back and review it. But I just want to if anyone's got any questions they want to throw at me, I'm more than happy to go through it. Thank you, Janie. Thank you. Yeah, it's just important that I don't just isolate my chat. I want to make sure that if you want to talk to me about anything, you can do. So, this is a friendly chat. This is an interactive chat. And I just want to obviously be able to speak with people. Okay, who was the Dutch drug lord you were talking about? Ah, right. Okay, yeah, Amsterdam. This was involving Charlie Richardson. I'll tell you now. Because you're right. They got the one they called the cocaine kingpin of Amsterdam. We'll find out who that was. I'll tell you who that was because he kind of in the book there they just brushed it, but we can find out who that is. This is what this is for. So we make sure that we know. So the Dutch. Okay, let's see if that is it. I don't think that's the correct one. No. Okay, I'm going to find out for you now. It is Roy Adkins, Cromel. Roy Adkins. I remember reading up about him actually. There's not too much about him out there, and that's he passed away anyway. So I've put his name in the chat for you. Holiday. Who's that? Roy, that's the one. Roy Adkins. Is there anyone else at all? Anyone got any more questions? Yeah. Yeah, I mean this is set back in the 80s. The Brinks-Mat, no worries, Crewmel. The Brinks-Mat robbery, when it happened, is nearly as old as me. So I was, as I say, I'm a 1980 kid, so that happened in 83. And a lot of these things, as you say, it was 10 years on when that business happened with Charlie Wilson. Yeah. Yeah, there is. what you'll find about the gold bullion robbery, how can I draw parallels? Is if prohibition set up allegedly set up the funding for the US mafia to go forward, then this was kind of what the heist, that the proceeds from that would then be used to invest into other businesses and criminal activities. And the main one is, as they mentioned there, people weren't robbing anymore. It was too risky. A lot of because back in the old days they used to pay the workers in wages in brown envelopes in cash. They don't do that anymore. So they weren't carrying the money, and it was too risky. And so drugs was going to be the way forward. It could make tons of money without actually having to do dangerous stuff. Yeah, I might have to check that one out. I'll have a look. But what I'm saying is, this is kind of like a base, and then sort of other criminal stories and things like that sort of come out of it. You've got like a base, and then other things just are created out of it. Am I still frozen? Is it better now? Am I back? Give me a thumbs up if I'm still there. Okay, cool. Yeah, like I say, I want to thank you all, everyone, for coming here and supporting. I really appreciate that. Yeah, there's a bit of delay. It's weird because obviously I'm looking at you on the StreamYard, and then I'm having a look over there, and there's like a 10-second delay. It can be quite off-putting sometimes. No, that's good. Anyone for anything or anything else? Does anyone sure? I'm in Scotland, so frozen most of the year. Yeah, Paul. Paul, I was thinking as well. I was having a little chat sort of here in Moscow, and I wouldn't mind. We could talk about covering Glasgow with the Arthur Thompson, Paul Ferris, and there's quite a few topics. This is all stuff that we cover that would be public knowledge. Good. I'm glad you did, Cinnamon. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Everyone coming here and joining in and listening. At the moment, I'm just doing content topics where I'll do a book, then I'll probably do something about travel again, or I'll do, and then once I want engaging you all more, I'd like to do a chat. I know most of you guys don't really go up on the panel, but like I say, we've had lots of like MRE. I know Teen who comes in. We've had quite a few people. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You're from the east. Oh, right, from the East End. Is that the? Ah, okay, cool. Good man. That's good. As I say, it's a book. I want to make sure that I keep on top, and I'm not really giving an opinion of any way. I'm using information that's already out there, and I'm just trying to deliver it to you. So, but yeah, it is, as I say, it is a real story with obviously people have done their investigating. But as I say, just everything in the books like this, you've got to take it with a pinch of salt. And another thing as well is some of the literature out there can be very pro-government, and it's not always the case, as we know. We've got other movements out there which a lot of us will support, like the We Push Back. Shout out to them. But this is, I just wanted to dip my toe in the water with this story, because I've always wanted to I was always intrigued about it, put it that way. And what I'll realise is, of all these names that I've been talking about, they don't make men like that anymore. A lot of this, they're like the last of the Mohicans. The gangs of today they're not gangs. They're just street drugs. They just would knock out drugs. They're just kids, a lot of them. And I don't mean to say that in a demeaning manner, because a lot of them kids are dangerous. Do you know what I mean? But the sort of the old fashioned sort of type gangster, you sort of looked up to them because they're like men with morals, you know. But yeah, it's a different world, and as I say as well, a lot of things are changing. Back then, well, the police didn't have the technology. You know, now there's cameras everywhere. Your phone could be tracked. They're trying to deal less and less with cash, and everything's now by payment by card, so they can keep tabs on you. You know, no one could be hidden. They will always catch up with you now. So it's a changing thing. And as you noticed as well, certainly in the States, that there's a lot of things, a lot of the rackets are starting to get legalized. You're gambling, for instance, a lot of that's getting legalized now. Marijuana, you know, you can get these like payday loans. Banks are giving out loans left, right, and centre. So there's that much need for shylocking. So yeah, it's just government have always, they're waiting to see, and then they'll just take those rackets and they just legalise them, which means a lot of it is now, as we know, seems to be drugs is the main front runner for the underworld. Yeah. Yes, right. Yeah, Jimmy Boyle. Yeah, I've heard of him. Yeah, John Viver. So Tam McGraw's another one, Paul. But that's actually a good thing that there is. It what does it stop crime? Well, yeah, it does in one sense. But where you needed loads of heavies and you needed your Shylockers and things like that, your criminals are still out, but your criminals are going to come in the form of computer hackers, financial crime. So what happens is things change, but so does the crime. The crime evolves as well, and the people behind it. So there's all it might be, I would like to say there'd be a lot. Yeah, okay, mate. We'll do that. We'll swap emails. Yeah, absolutely, Paul. We'll do a few things. But I would just like to say, like, touching on Suzanne's comment there, is that I know that he said that there's a lot less crime. You would think that with a lot of that drying up, that there'll be less violence on the street. But I certainly, when I look at the UK and I look at what's going on in America, if anything, there seems to be the crimes going up. Yes, that's right. Cyber criminals and crypto. There'll always be a need for money to be transferred outside the SWIFT banking system, because even your people with we know that people at the top, they're all looking to move money around and get out of tax loopholes. It'll always be there. It just changes form. So yeah, no, that's good. I want to get some good little comments here. I'm enjoying this. Yeah. So, anyone for anything else? Any other questions? Okay, Semi is up here in the Netherlands. Is that your neck of the woods then, Crewell? Not now. Okay. That's good. Okay. I'm going to say that gone, I think. As I say, thank you for everyone that's still here, everyone that's come in, and thank you to everyone outside the chat. Like I say, I'll try and go again tomorrow. My voice box is going, but thank you all. I love you all. God bless.